Just going to go ahead and start. Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Coexistence in Practice webinar series hosted by the Coexistence Consortium. So before we dive into today's talk, I would like to give a brief introduction about the Coexistence Consortium for those of you who might be new here and joining us today for the first time. The Coexistence Consortium is a network of conservation researchers and practitioners from diverse disciplines, united by a common vision. And this vision is to understand the intricate dynamics of coexistence between humans and wildlife. So our mission extends beyond just the conservation of wild animals confined to distant forest pockets. We emphasize the importance of living well with nature, even within our immediate surroundings, wherever that may be. Our collective long-term vision is to employ an evidence-based approach to mobilize the concept of human-wildlife coexistence across the globe by focusing and learning from context-specific projects. So we will be putting up our social media handles on the chat, and you can learn more about who we are and the work that we, all of the coexistence members do. And so just sort of some housekeeping about today's seminar. The structure of the seminar is that our speaker will be presenting for about 40 to 45 minutes, which will be followed by a 15 to 20-minute Q&A. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Garima. Garima, we were having a chat about the kind of work that she does, and it is absolutely fascinating. So Dr. Garima Gupta is an interdisciplinary conservation researcher whose work bridges ecology, justice, and indigenous knowledge systems. Her research and collaborations are across India and the UK, and most of her work explores complex relationships between people and nature, with a focus on community-led conservation and partnerships with indigenous people and local communities. She is passionate about turning research into action and works to co-create nature-based solutions that inform inclusive and equitable policies. Currently, she is an independent researcher, and Dr. Gupta advocates for communities living in harmony with nature. She also serves as a trustee of the Cross River Gorilla Project and as a member of the Equity, Inclusion and Diversity Subcommittee of the Social Science Working Group under the Society of Conservation Biology. So in her talk today, she will be highlighting 4 very interesting case studies about communities across India, which embody coexistence with nature, challenging colonial conservation models, and advocating for decolonized, justice-oriented approaches that center community wisdom, rights, and stewardship. Over to you, Garima.
Thank you, Sagarika. And thank you for Coexistence Consortium for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here today. As Sagarika said, the title is Sundarbans because of tigers, Decolonizing Coexistence through Community Wisdom. In this talk, I want to explore what it really means to coexist with the wild, not just as a conservation goal, but as a lived practice rooted in culture, values, and relationships. I'll share insights from my research and field work across India in Sundarbans, Meghalaya, Uttarakhand, and Arunachal Pradesh to reflect on how community wisdom and indigenous knowledge can help us rethink conservation in more inclusive, equitable, and locally grounded ways. I want to be very clear. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a social scientist. I was trained in natural sciences. My academic journey began in natural sciences, where my training was focused on ecology, species conservation, and quantitative analysis. My PhD research was on data and conservation of galliforms in the Greater Himalayan region. I did my PhD from Newcastle University, UK. And during my master's degree as well, it was environmental studies from Doon University, Uttarakhand. And during this time, I had a chance to conduct a socio-ecological surveys, particularly studying the rehabilitation program of one Gujjars from Rajaji National Park. And that experience profoundly shaped my interest in social dimension of conservation. Over time, I realized that to truly understand conservation challenges, especially in a complex landscape in the such as Himalayan region. I come from Uttarakhand, so I've traveled across Uttarakhand and I've traveled in Himachal, in some parts of Northeast India, and it's just I realized that we need to look beyond species and ecosystem and engage with people, values, and justice. So, building on my scientific background, I have been navigating towards the social sciences, trying to bridge ecological data with lived experiences to understand grassroots challenges in conservation, such as forest conservation, and explore how we can achieve global biodiversity and climate targets that are not just ecologically sustainable but socially just. Um, so just to start my presentation, so the first thing that comes to mind is what exactly it means to truly coexist with the wild. And so I took this quote from this book called A Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold, where he said, "When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." And this is the that's the ethos that which communities and uh, forest people across India and the world have been practicing. And it's not just as a policy that they are practicing this ethos, but as a way of life. So my journey began, like I said, that I had an opportunity during my master's degree where I had the opportunity to interview one Gujars and learn coexistence from them. So until then, I didn't really know much about the communities, the forest tribes, indigenous people, like how and why they are like why they don't want to. So the project was basically that so my master's degree, we had 6 months time where we had the opportunity to do an internship project, and I chose to do this project with Rajaji National Park. And the then director of Rajaji National Park assigned a project to us as they were working on the rehabilitation of one Gujars from the Rajaji National Park. So Rajaji National Park was declared a national park and later a tiger reserve in 1983 under India's Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. And according to that act, human habitation is not permitted in the core areas. So that's why the Forest Department and the Uttarakhand government, they were trying to rehabilitate one Gujars from the Rajaji National Park, and they chose an area outside of the park to settle the resettle like to resettle the communities over there. And our project was to understand why, despite being offered what was described as one of the most best rehabilitation package, which includes land, electricity, healthcare, education, many Gujars, they didn't want to go there, and they were refusing, and that became a big problem for the forest department. So we conducted a socio-ecological survey to listen to their perspective and find the gaps. And what we learned was like it was a very profound experience for me. That was the first experience when I had the first hand experience of working with communities, listening to their perspectives, understanding their way of living with nature and why they would not choose more comfortable life and still live inside. So what I learned was that their resistance was not about material benefits; it was about belonging. For the one Gujars, the forest is not just their home; it's not a resource. Their lives, their culture, and spirituality are deeply intertwined with the landscape. So their experience shaped the foundation of my research to understand how communities live with and rather than apart from nature, and what that truly means for conservation today. So one of the, like Sagarika, she mentioned that I will be presenting 4 case studies, and so I didn't have an extensive experience of work, but this was a really good experience for me, as we were inside the Rajaji National Park for 3 or 4 weeks. and we were visiting different deras where the One Gujars live, and we were interviewing them. So One Gujars, they are semi-nomadic pastoralist communities who have lived in the Western Himalayas for generations. And every year they migrate with their buffalo herds. So buffaloes or the cattle, that's the main source of livelihood for One Gujars. So they spend winters in the lowest Shivaliks, which is the Rajaji National Park, and then they move, like in summers, they move to the higher altitudes, the pastures, with their kettles. So migration was not just a livelihood strategy, but it's a sustainable ecological practice that they have been practicing for years. So it allows both the grazing pastures and the forest ecosystems to regenerate naturally. So they settle down in one place for 6 months, and then they leave for the higher, like in summer they come down, and then in winter they go up. So I interviewed many people, and when I interviewed one community elder, he basically said, "We are called threat to the jungle, but if we were truly a threat, the forest you see today would not have existed." And that was true, like because the One Gujars have been there forever, like for ages they have been practicing this. And if they were truly a threat to the forest or to the wildlife, for example, Rajaji National Park would not have existed today. So for One Gujars, the forest is not just a resource that they want to exploit. It's a shared home that sustains both people and wildlife. So their way of life respect a deep ecological understanding and respect for coexistence. Then the second case study is from my experience. Like, so I had a chance to attend a workshop for 5 days in Sundarbans to understand the restoration part of like what the researchers in West Bengal and around the world have been doing to restore mangroves and Sundarbans. And we also had the opportunity to interview one of the communities in Sundarbans. So Sundarbans, for those who don't know, is a vast mangrove delta which is shared by India and Bangladesh, and it's the only mangrove ecosystem in the world where tigers live, the Royal Bengal tiger. Enlisted as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987, uh, it's also declared a tiger reserve in 1973, a national park in 1984, and then it became a critical tiger habitat in 2007. Measures meant to protect its extraordinary biodiversity. And then so Sundarbans is a classic example, another classic example of fortress conservation, as it was the top-down protection that created a deep paradox. So the reason why I said it created this paradox is because Sundarbans is also home to more than 4.5 million people, nearly half of whom are there either landless or they live below poverty lives. Their lives are tied to the forest because their livelihood source depends on the forest and the intertidal region, because they collect honey, fish, and crabs for survival from the forest and from the mangrove areas. But because since the core zone is strictly protected, again because of the Wildlife Protection Act of India, they're officially banned from entering the forest. But out of necessity, many they still venture into the mangroves, risking their lives. And tiger attacks are one of the most predominant human wildlife conflict that they face. But the problem is that their deaths often go unreported, uh, because again they're not allowed to enter the forest area. But because it's out of necessity, they have to enter the protected area, the forest, and because that's illegal, they're not allowed to do that. Their deaths they often go unreported because the families, they fear punishment for entering restricted area, and therefore they are denied compensation as well. So the honey they gathered from these forests is often called as blood honey, because of the fact that they pay a huge price to survive and to collect this honey. So women, so mainly it's the men who goes inside the forest to collect the resources and for fishing, for collecting honey. And when they get killed, or when women they lose their husband in this process, they're commonly known as tiger widows. But despite these hardships, the community reverence for tiger and the forest, it's remarkable. Their faith in, I might be pronouncing it completely wrong, please pardon me, in Bonbini, which is the forest goddess, worshipped by both Hindus and Muslims, teaches that one must enter the forest with a clean heart and take only what is needed and respect all beings. This belief transformed the forest into a shared moral space governed by restraint and reverence rather than law. Despite a 5-day workshop, which I attended in June 2022. So when, like I said, one of the days we had the chance to interview the communities. Um, we asked the people there, do you want tigers in the Sundarbans, or would you prefer Sundarbans without tiger, given the loss and the danger you guys live with? And it was just amazing to see to hear what they said. They were like, Sundarbans is Sundarbans because of tigers, and it would not be same without tigers. So it was really amazing because in spite of facing all the dangers, losing their family members, their only breadwinners in the family, they still want to see tigers in Sundarbans, which shows the relation they have with the nature and the wildlife, and in the world that lies in the worldview that conservation policies often overlook. One that recognizes that tiger is not a threat, but as a part of what makes life and landscape whole. So this whole belief system, which combines different beliefs, different traditions and practices, it's a form of cultural resilience, and it unites communities across religion and the caste, because we know Hindu and Muslims, they're two different religions, and is often a is often a problematic thing in India. So sustaining both people and biodiversity in one of the world's most precarious ecosystem, which is Sundarbans. So then going to the next case study, which is the sacred groves of Meghalaya, where the forest is family, where these communities, Khasi and Jaintia communities, they see forest as family, and they have protected sacred forest for generation, and they call it law. Again, sorry for my pronunciation. It's called law kintang. So these groves are believed to be the dwelling. So they believe in spirits and the forest spirits. Like, they believe that every natural system they have a spirit, and they believe that these powerful beings who guard the forest. So I was doing some field work for my postdoctoral research at Stirling University on the Beacon Project. And I had the chance to visit one of the sacred forests, which is called Moflang Sacred Forest in Meghalaya. And sorry. So yes, I had the chance to I met one girl. She's working as a community leader. She also take tourists in sites to give a tour and tell tourists about how they have been practicing sacred this whole thing about sacred forest. So it is like, so how these communities, they have been practicing or protecting what's considered as one of the most undisturbed and species rich biodiversity area. And the reason how they have protected is that because they believe that even if you can go inside the forest, you can consume or you can take whatever you are when in sight, but you're not allowed to even take or pluck a leaf or twig without purpose, and if you do so, that can anger the spirits and bring harm. So she actually showed, they have published a journal where they have got like different stories about how different people, they came into the area, they went inside, and they didn't want to believe in all these beliefs, and how those, they took something just to challenge the system and just to challenge the whole belief system, and how like, that whole thing angered the forest spirits, and how it was actually bad, for like something bad happened to them for sure. And so that was a really great, again, like a very amazing experience I had discussing all this with Filari. Her name is Filari, and so this whole unwritten and this whole unwritten law, it embodies like the moral of restraint and reciprocity, basically saying that you can take what sustains you in the moment, but never for accumulation. So these sacred groves, it remains among the most untouched and biodiverse rich ecosystem in Northeast India, thriving through moral foundations, like I said, their own belief system. And there's no as such law that defines all these rules. It's just their own belief system, their traditional taboos, or whatever they have been, the traditional wisdom that has followed through the ancestors. And this whole, again, this mirrors the Sundarban communities who worship Bonbini. And they said that if you, when you, like I said, when you enter the forest with a clean heart, you can take whatever you need, but you should have respect for every creature inside the forest. And the last case study was which Sahil has presented already on, and he's done amazing work there. So Idhu Mishmi of Arunachal Pradesh, and some of you might already know about this book called Tigers Are Our Brothers, and how they have been following this kinship relationship with the forest and the tiger, and how they believe that the tigers and the humans, they come from the same descendants, and one chose the forest and one chose the 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 non-forest area, sorry. And so they believe that because they have this relationship with tigers, they believe that if you kill tigers, it's like killing your own kin, and it's a taboo. So they don't kill a tiger. And sorry. Um, so yes, so again, in their, so this whole, like, the kinship extends far beyond tigers. So I think, from my experience and working and talking to the community members in Lower Dibang and Dibang Valley, they were telling me about like how Hulok gibbon, again, one of the threatened species, how they don't hunt Kulok because of their own traditional beliefs. Bengal florican is again one of the other species they don't hunt, and these all have histories and stories. They have their own belief systems, and so they, because they believe that all of nature is animated by a spirit, like every river, every mountain, every tree, and every forest patch is believed to have its own guardian spirit, and which deserves respect and care. So their own ritualists, like we have priests or pandits, they have igu or shamans, which mediate the balance between nature and the humans and these spirits, and ensuring that the use of natural resources is accompanied by ritual offerings and more restraint. So again, in this sense, it's not inert, it is alive, it is relational. They have this reciprocity relationship. So this cosmology creates a moral framework where nature is sacred and extraction is governed by reciprocity. And again, you can collect what is needed, but you should always have respect and balance for the nature and the wildlife. I mean, I will not be talking about the Idhu Mishmi a lot, because that wouldn't be justice, as Sahil has already, like I said, presented on this. So this, as we journey through these landscapes, different landscapes, from tiger forest of Sundarbans to the sacred forest of Meghalaya to the so I mean, I didn't talk about one panchayats, but there's another such system called one panchayat in Uttarakhand, Rajaji National Park. So all these people and these communities, they have this kinship world of this their own existence, and it's not just a policy goal, it's the way of life, grounded in care, restraint, and reciprocity. And it's a bit off track, but I was talking to Sagarika and about this film called Kantara, and I recently watched it, and I was really amazed to see, like, how they have featured this whole human and nature relationship, and how they live in restraint. And so some of you might have already seen this movie, but if you have not, so this whole film is beautifully, it captures this relationship, and it's set in the coastal Karnataka, and it centers on it's called Bhutha Kola tradition. Again, an animistic ritual performance that honors forest deities or devas, believed to be the guardians of land and the forest. It tells stories of a community who live in deep reverence for the land and the spirits that protect it. And what happens is when the sacred thread between people and nature is broken. So we have, like, most of the communities we have spoken about, whether it's the Sundarbans communities, the Mishmis, the Khasi and Jaintias. So all they have this living moral being, and that speaks about balance and justice. So what it's to really, to truly rethink coexistence, it's we need to move beyond the, we need to move from recognition justice, by recognizing their relationship with the nature, their how they have been protecting ecosystem, and acknowledging indigenous and local worldviews to reparative justice, which basically means that we need to restore the relationship, redistributes power, and rebuilds the trust between with the people, of the IPLCs, the indigenous people and local communities. So then moving on to this whole thing is that when people of Sundarbans, in spite of the threat they faces with tigers, they still want tigers in the system. And in the same spirit, the world is, like they said, Sundarbans is Sundarbans because of tigers. And in the same spirit, the forest, we need these forests. The world will not be the same as it is today without the forest and the people who inhabits it. So this, just one very quick this thing about how, when top down conservation and infrastructure, when it disrupts the coexistence that the communities have been practicing, what actually happens. So some of you might already know. So there's a big, it's a 12-kilometer elevated road that has been, constructed within, like, inside the, it's not in the core area though, but still. So yeah, I forgot to mention that the rehabilitation part of the one Gujjas have already been completed. So they have been evicted from the forest. And what's the ironical part is that, in spite of practicing what they, and, like, how they were living with nature in harmony, how they were considered as a threat to the nature, whereas this whole elevated road, which will be a big problem for the wildlife, a lot of trees were cut down, and the policy makers or the government, they're calling it the green corridor. Although no one, I mean, people who are from Uttarakhand or who have seen the destruction caused because of this elevated road, they know what was done to build this corridor. And in the same way, the Sundarbans, because of the fortress style conservation, it severely restricts the local access to the forest. And honey collectors again, like honey collectors and fishers, they risk their life by entering the tiger territory. And like, so this is again like a top down conservation thing, like the fortress conservation sort of model, which we have been practicing again from the colonial times. So, and again, and the thing with the Arunachal Pradesh, there's a lot of hydropower projects coming up. The government is proposing a lot of dams to tap the potential for create for the water resources and electricity generation. And they say there are different reasons why they have been proposing this. Some is the geopolitical reasons, as we share the border with China there, and revenue generation. But what happens in this whole process is that, the Mishmi communities whose kinship beliefs have long guided them to protect tigers and forests as living relatives, eroding their traditional wisdom and taboos and ancestral lands. So they're proposing a tiger reserve reserve there as well. So whereas tigers were there, and like I said in my previous slides, I've said that they consider tiger as their brother and they never hunt. So again, they want to have a tiger reserve in the Bang Valley for tigers, again a fortress conservation method, and that would again it will just it will disrupt the existing moral and ecological relation the people of Arunachal have been following and are maintaining. So these examples, they remind us that when conservation and development are imposed from above, and when local communities or local, the people are not consulted or their voices are not heard, what actually happens. And what we need instead are the bottom up approaches that restore both justice and balance. So that I will be talking about next. So we need, when we talk about coexistence, it's often framed as a policy goal, sometimes something which conservationists and decision makers aim to achieve. But for many communities across India and the world, coexistence is not an idea, it's a way of life. It's practiced daily through care, restraint, and respect. It's rooted in their traditional practices, in their cultural values. Even if it's a superstitious belief, it's there. But it's the spiritual connections that, with the land and the nature, and the relationship that recognizes that humans and natures are deeply intertwined. So these worldview challenges the notions that, the conservations mean keeping people and nature separate. Instead, they remind us that we belong to the same community of life, and that living well does not really mean living away from it. It means living with the wild. So I recently submitted one paper to conservation letters. It's under review, where basically the title was Decolonizing Sustainability. Sorry, it's very small. Indigenous and local conservation systems from India in global climate and biodiversity agenda, where I was basically talking about how nature and people are an integral component or integral part of an ecosystem, and they share a same space. So, and my basically, I proposed a framework where it illustrates how the IPLCs are at the center of socio-ecological systems. The practices and values can drive transformative change, not only for biodiversity and climate goals, but for social justice and sustainability. And the cycle, the diagram in my slide, it shows how the cycle begins with nature-based approaches that are people-centric and nature-centric, rooted in local worldviews rather than imposed externally. These in turn help meet the global targets, the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which we are, right now trying to achieve to prevent the biodiversity loss. And we have the climate change, two of the biggest problems the world is facing today. And how we can meet these global targets, but in ways that uphold equity. So ultimately, these insights must inform policies that are inclusive in nature, that are socially just, and environmentally sustainable. So it creates a feedback. So if you see, it creates a feedback loop that strengthens both human and ecological well-being. It decolonizing coexistence. So it decolonizes the coexistence, the whole thing. And it's not about rejecting the modern conservation. It's about broadening it to include people and to include the nature. And it's about broadening it to include the plural ontologies. We need to include the customs. We need to include the folklores, the stories, the local stewardship, and how they have been practicing the you know the traditions, the wisdom, and how we can uh, heal our relationship with nature. So I mean, this whole thing is about how we um, how we can achieve the transformative change and justice oriented policy by working with the communities from their lived experiences. So this is again from my paper. So I basically challenged the top-down nature-based solution, which dichotomizes nature and people from ecosystem, and it's basically uh, you know framed by, or often it emerges from global policy agendas framed by institutions and decision makers who design interventions and then they implement them on people and on places. So nature based, sorry, oh my, uh, yeah, sorry. So that's my last slide, and I just want to say that to live with the land. It's again adapted from Aldo Leopold's Land Ethic book. It's to live with the land is not to own it, but to belong to it, and to protect the stories and cultures and spirit that keep it alive. So thank you so much. And sorry, and this picture I took when I was traveling in Arunachal Pradesh, and basically in the Yingkiong Upper Siang region, where they have been protesting against the biggest dam, which is in the Upper Siang Valley. And so that's what they said, that loss of culture is loss of identity. And yeah, with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Karima. That was a very interesting talk, especially false case studies and how they're so different, but they're also, there is a common thread that kind of runs through each of them. I just want to open the floor up for any questions. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and just ask Karima directly, or you could even type it out on the chat and then we can read it out to her.
Hi, Garima. I'm just,
Yes.
hi. Thank you for the presentation. First of all, it was a great talk and it has this flow and everything. I have just couple of doubts. So, you have traveled to these case studies and you have got the information from the local community. How long have you lived with those communities? For what duration of time? And I find that they all have this common link. And do you plan to work in one particular region for a long period of time going forward, or what does your interest lie in? Like yes, because most of yes, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Seema. So basically, like I said, all my training has been in natural sciences, but I had these opportunities, here and there to work with communities. For example, during my master's, when I was working on Van Gujus, so we stayed in the forest because that project was assigned to us by forest department. So we had the permissions to stay inside the Rajaji National Park, and so I was there for 3 weeks, like continuously. But then we were like we were going like so this project was for 6 months, and we also had the opportunity to interview some of the people, like some of the Gujars who had by that time rehabilitated to the other the rehabilitated region, to understand their perspective, like because they were living the other side of so they were living the reality of the rehabilitation program. So that was during my master's. Then Sundarbans was a very short duration, so that was like a 5-day workshop which I attended. and we were traveling to different parts of Sundarbans because they're different, because it's quite big. And so that was just one day of community interaction which we had in Sundarbans, but that was really amazing because I mean, I still get goosebumps when I think about how these people were like literally so like, marginalized, and because of policies and the conservation models and everything which we have in India, and yet how they still want to see tigers in spite of, like, so there were many tiger widows whom, like, when we interviewed them. And so it was really amazing. And then so it was mainly during like 2.5 years of my postdoc experience working on the Beacon project. So that was studying the trade-offs between different SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And so we studied hydropower dams as a model system to understand how these dams are good for certain goals like climate change, clean energy, access to water, but how it comes at a cost of communities and the forest, like the community. And so so one of my case studies was in India, on Tiri Dam in Uttarakhand. And I was there for like 3 months interviewing people, like visiting with different communities. Although that was more about the social aspects, the energy justice issues, how they have been facing all these challenges even after 20 years of dam commissioning. And during that time, when I was doing this field work in Tiri, there was a group of like a youth association from Arunachal Pradesh that was visiting Tiri Dam that time. And so the government was trying to show them the Tiri model, which is considered as one of the biggest and the best example of the R&R package and everything. So I had an interaction with the communities there, and their apprehensions and their fears and what they were thinking about. So they had no idea about what a dam is about, like what exactly happens when a dam comes to a place. So they invited us to come to Arunachal Pradesh. So that's when I got to know more about Arunachal. And so that was in 2023, and I visited, like, I did a recce sort of thing in drawing like Lower Dibang Valley and sorry, in Yingkiong, the Upper Siang Valley. So, and then last year again, I did like a proper 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I can't really remember. I think it was around 3 to 4 weeks when I stayed in Arunachal, in Lower Dibang and Dibang Valley, interviewing the Idu Mishmi communities. And it was less about dams, but it was more about their practices. And I was very keen to learn about, like, how they have been living with in Arunachal. And so that was the first time. It's very bizarre. That was the first time when I was talking to these communities in Arunachal, when they said Delhi as mainland India, because that's the term which we generally don't really hear in this, like, in this part of India. So yes, so that was my experiences so far. And coming to your question, whether I have any specific preference to work in a specific location, I mean, I would love to work with different communities. Uh, like Sundarbans is completely different, but because I've lived and studied, and all my education is in Uttarakhand, and my PhD was in the looking at the conservation of galliforms in the Himalayan region. So I think I've traveled and worked mostly in the Himalayan region, but yes, I would be more interested in expanding to other landscapes in India and other parts of the world, where I would love to work and understand more about different communities and their practices. And yes, it's quite fascinating to just, even if these, like, when I was a kid, and I had many people who are from Garhwal region in Uttarakhand, and they used to tell us the stories that about the paris, like as in the fairy spirit or something, that when you go to the mountains, or in the higher up mountains, you should not you should speak very softly. Otherwise, the spirits will attack. I mean, will come and something like that. Which that time didn't make any sense because I mean, you don't want to believe in all these superstitious stories. But if you think about this it's actually makes sense. They're really very, like, thought upon, like, practices that they have been following, because considering how fragile the Himalayan ecosystem is, but then today, in today's world, when we see all these unrestricted constructions, the highways and dams, and all these all season roads, and what they have done to Uttarakhand and Himalaya. So I think I have a affinity, I mean, a soft corner for the Himalayan region. But yes, I would love to expand to other landscapes as well.
Thanks, Karima. I think Camelia, you have your hand up. Do you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much. It was super interesting and very nice presentation. Thank you for that. I have like two questions, or like, I mean, obviously, I just want to know your point of view. One is obviously around decolonization or decolonizing the whole conservation sort of POV. And from a very praxis point of view, I wanted to know, as we as a conservation social scientist or conservation researcher, how do you situate your positionality into it? That one question. And obviously, second is on Sundarbans, where I work around, and I understand that you've just been there, like for 5 days. So I'm not going to go in deep asking or asking questions, but just wondering, when we are talking about these communities, and I'm just talking from Sundarbans because where I've worked around, it is also there are, have you seen these like intra-community sort of, differentiation? Because there's a lot of negotiation that happens around. And when obviously in Sundarbans, we often see Sundarbans as, a landscape where there is just tigers, but obviously there are other animals that doesn't get its sort of global attention, like snakes, crocodiles, and all of those things. So I would love to know what is your take around these two questions. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for your questions. So I would like to address the second question first. Like I said, the Sundarbans experience was a very, like, it was a very short experience for me. I still resonate with the thing is because I still cannot forget the woman, the widow, the tiger widow, when she said, we want Sundarbans in the region because Sundarbans will not be Sundarbans without tigers. So I think, yes, you're right that tigers, but then that's the whole conservation problem, isn't it? The whole paradox is that the big charismatic species, they get attention, whereas the other species such as snakes and crocodiles and all these species, they don't really get that much attention. But I think that's more like a big conservation problem. Um, so yes, you're right that we should. I mean, there are other important species, like there's horseshoe crab. I know one of my friends, she works on horseshoe crabs. Like a that's like a living fossil, and she used, so it was.
Communities around. So, what is the take on what is the research praxis and the in and out of the field, but also our research positionality around that? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So this is actually, so if I go back to my this slide, and actually, so this is the time. I mean, I'm actually writing fellowship proposals. Like, I want to actually work on. I'm challenging in this paper. It's under review. I will share it once it's there. But it's on the the SOC archives. I can share the link with you if you want to read that paper. Basically, what I'm trying to challenge here is that the top-down approach, which is basically that nature-based solutions, the policymakers, they make these solutions, they frame all these policies, all these so when we talk about nature-based solutions, we mainly talk about ecological restoration project. We see so that's one of this, like, the whole greenwashing concept of like carbon credits, biodiversity credits, and all these things. And it sees nature and people as two different components of an ecosystem, and basically saying that, so the global targets, the biodiversity and conservation, it's basically that we need to make, we need these targets. We need, in order to achieve these targets, we need nature-based solutions. Whereas what I'm trying to propose is that instead of nature-based solutions, we need nature-based approaches that we need to co-create with people. And what I'm trying to say is that people and nature, they're an integral part of an ecosystem. We cannot take one component out to achieve a just conservation. So I mean, there's so many challenges. So like you said, what kind of decolonizing conservation? So like, the whole concept of protected area is a colonial sort of conservation model which we follow in India. And so that's like, instead of having these areas which Mishmi, like, I mean, there's so many, like sacred forest is again one of the examples of community managed forest. One panchayat in Uttarakhand again a perfect example of how people have been managing huge of forest in Uttarakhand. And one panchayat is the only forest governance system in Uttarakhand. I mean, that's only practiced in Uttarakhand. So there like, there are these like it's replete with examples. Like there's so many conservation efforts or practices. What, like, like say for example, like, the one Gujar which I interviewed, he said that, we are considered as threat, but we are not threat. Like if we were the threat, these forests, the forest you see today would not have been there. And that's true. Like, the forests have been there for ages, whereas now with the infrastructure development, hydropower dams, and these protected areas, like, so these are actually getting like diluted, so on one hand, they evicted the one Gujars from Rajaji National Park because it's a protected area and no human interference is allowed. And on the other hand, they built this 12-kilometer of elevated road, which they call as the Green Corridor, or the greenest elevated road, right through the heart of the jungle, which is basically like the elephant corridor. And so imagine that, like, the number of vehicles going, coming in and out, and the light pollution, the noise pollution, and everything, and how it will just disrupt the whole ecosystem. So that's one of the things which I want to work on, and this is so I've written a project. It's called Connect. Basically, like, co-creating nature-based approaches with indigenous people to achieve conservation targets, like not targets but conservation. So so does that answer your question, Camelia?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Any last questions, since we're exactly on time from the audience? I think it would be really great to read your paper because it does sound very, very interesting. And a lot of the conversations that we have in the consortium are about, how we do need to decolonize the current systems that are there. And it would be really interesting to kind of read this paper. But yeah.
I'll share it with, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Karma. That would be great. So any other final questions before we wrap up for today? No? Okay. So thanks so much, Garima. I know it's been a very busy and hectic schedule for you, but thanks so much for taking the time